Oh, is this a video?
Okay, I'll wrap then.
Morgan Hill teenager Sierra LaMar vanished, leading to a search and ultimately an arrest and conviction.
I need to know everything you did on Friday, March 16th.
This is looking more and more like this young man is associated to this case.
Jones was found guilty on both counts of rape and murder.
And it's really totally been a waste of lives.
I still wake up every day thinking it's a dream, but it's reality, and I'm dealing with it.
Sometimes missing people come home. Sometimes they don't. But what's worse is when their bodies are discovered with all evidence pointing towards foul play. And when it comes to nasty abductions, no demographic has it worse than teen girls. In this video, we're talking about Bonnie Craig and Sierra LaMar, who both left for school one morning and never made it back home, followed by the tragic case of Brook Baker, who was found dead in her own apartment. No traces of the killer. Let's dive into the cases of sweet teen girls whose abductions weren't solved until decades later.
Karen Campbell intends to do everything she can to keep the investigation alive.
Bonnie Craig was 18 years old and had her whole life ahead of her. The oldest out of her siblings, Bonnie wasn't your average teenager. She was responsible and always ready to help her mom Karen and father Jim watch over the house. It was a chilly autumn night in September 1994 when Bonnie's parents had gone off for a little vacation in the tiny town of St. Mark's. Jim and Karen knew that their daughter would take care of everything while they were gone, and she probably would have if things hadn't gone the way that they had. On September 29th, Bonnie woke up, got ready, and left for school at 5 a.m. like she always did. Bonnie was a freshman at the University of Alaska in Anchorage. Twice a week, she would walk 45 minutes to catch a bus to get to college in time for her 7 a.m. English class. But that fateful morning, she never made it to class. And while her teacher noticed Bonnie's absence, never in her wildest dreams did she imagine that something bad had happened to her student. At 2:30 in the afternoon, a hiker called 911 and told the dispatchers to come over to McHugh Creek, where he had found a young girl's body lying face down. When the police arrived on the scene, they identified the girl to be Bonnie and immediately got in contact with her parents. At the time, the authorities believed that the young girl had died in a hiking accident. However, when Karen came back home and saw her daughter's body for the first time, she immediately knew that some kind of foul play was definitely involved. The first question that Karen asked the police officers involved in the case was, how did she get there? Then she told the authorities that her daughter did not know how to drive. That, and the fact that McHugh Creek was around 10 miles away from her bus route. The whole thing just didn't make any sense. When the police suggested that Bonnie could have come to the trail sometime, the distressed mother said that Bonnie should have been in her 2:30 p.m. class when the body was discovered, and that she would never skip school or miss a single class. It was all so unlike her. This is why Karen didn't believe that this was just an accident. What's even stranger is that when Bonnie's body was discovered, the police identified her through a class ring with her name on it. Her wallet and all other forms of ID were nowhere to be found, along with her backpack. All of this gave Karen all the reasons she had to believe that her daughter hadn't just fallen off a 30-foot cliff on her own. Someone had murdered her. She demanded answers from the police, but unfortunately, the case went cold, with the authorities having no reason to believe that this was a murder case. Then things took a turn for the worse when Karen identified a bunch of bruises on Bonnie's wrists. Her knuckles were swollen up and her arms were covered in marks and scratches, almost as if the girl had struggled against someone much stronger than her. This made Karen believe that the police weren't telling her everything that they knew about the case, and while she tried to do everything in her power to make them fess up, or at least show her Bonnie's autopsy reports, the authorities refused to comply, asking Bonnie to step down and stop drawing so much attention to the whole thing.
Everybody here in town put up signs, flyers, bumper stickers. We wanted to make sure that until the crime was solved, Nobody was going to forget about it.
While Karen tried to raise her voice and tell the whole world about her daughter's unsolved murder, a reporter named Maria Downey joined forces with her to get to the bottom of the mystery and help Bonnie find justice. The truth is that as soon as Karen had come to know of her daughter's murder, she asked the police if she had been violated. At the time, they told Karen that there was no evidence to point toward any kind of assault. However, 6 months later, the police eventually released Bonnie's examination reports, which indicated that she had indeed been put through some kind of abuse. The forensic experts found semen samples on her body. However, no evidence could prove that the act wasn't consensual. This is why it wasn't considered to be anything that could turn the case or point towards Bonnie being murdered. Knowing her daughter, and after being completely frustrated with how the police were handling the case, Karen, with the help of Maria, decided to get to the bottom of the whole thing on her own. In 1995, Karen was finally able to see the autopsy report with her own eyes, and what she saw shocked her to no end. Bonnie had been murdered. She had died of several blunt force trauma injuries to her head. Her left index finger was fractured, and she had 11 lacerations on the back of her head, which was the strangest out of all her injuries. The doctor investigating the case also told Karen that the tearing in Bonnie's vaginal walls, along with the other injuries on her body, definitely suggested foul play. But the good thing was that the semen samples found on her gave them the DNA evidence that they needed to track this inhumane killer down. This kicked off a major investigation where the police called in plenty of suspects. The first one of them was Bonnie's coworker at Sam's Club. Now, Bonnie had complained about this young man to her supervisor, claiming that he had been calling her to harass her. However, his DNA sample did not match the one found on Bonnie. The police questioned another coworker who had been absent the day Bonnie was killed, but this man was not a match either.
Who's his source?
When I gave him all the details, he just kept asking me, "Where are you getting this information?" I said it was from somebody who did not want to be identified. I wouldn't reveal my source. He told me, "Well, then you're hindering your daughter's investigation, and I'm not going to investigate this lead." And to this day, I don't know what they've done, and probably will never know what they've done as far as investigating that lead.
Perhaps the strongest suspect came to light when Bonnie's English teacher contacted Karen and told her about one of the students in her class who she had found to be extremely suspicious the day that Bonnie died. According to the professors, she had gotten her hands on the young man's journal, and his entries from the day that Bonnie died included things like, "Today is going to be a very tough day," with the boy claiming that he was going to be put to a test. When Karen saw these writings, she remembers finding them extremely aggressive and violent.
His journal was incredibly violent, filled with anger, and there was 2 incidents where he specifically said that September 28th was going to be a very tough day, that he was going to be put to a test.
But that's not it. The English professor also claims that the boy was actually late to class that day, and when he did show up, he was soaking wet, as if he had just taken a shower. He also smelled strongly of cologne. The students' journal entries after that particular day were less violent, and what's more is that the police also found him hanging around the creek during the time that Bonnie was found. That's pretty much rock solid evidence, isn't it? But when the young man was tested for his DNA, he was found to be a negative match, sending the whole investigation into a spiral once again. However, Karen was convinced that the police were wrong to let him go, especially when she found out that he had another assault charge against him, but he had been bailed out by a friend who had also been involved in a murder. So, could these two have possibly teamed up to kill Bonnie? Sadly, all DNA testing showed that these 2 men were just shady and had nothing to do with Bonnie. In fact, they had airtight alibis for the time that Bonnie was murdered, clearing them of any suspicions.
Until the crime is solved, it just keeps going through your head that somebody else's child will end up murdered and also.
And just like that, with one failed lead after another, the case went cold, and soon the world forgot about Bonnie Craig and her mysterious death. But in January 2007, 12 years after her daughter was laid to rest, Karen was on vacation once again when she received a call that changed her entire life. This time, the phone call was from an investigator named Timothy Hunyan. from the Alaska Bureau of Investigation Cold Case Unit. He told Karen that there had been some recent developments in Bonnie's case, and the police had actually found a match for the DNA sample that they had found on her years ago. The discovery was made after a man named Kenneth Dion was arrested for a string of armed robberies in November 2006. The investigation proved that around the time of Bonnie's death, he had been living in Anchorage. Dion had actually been arrested a bunch of times before Bonnie's murder, and if the authorities had collected his DNA earlier, the case would have never gone cold for as long as it did. Dion was 36 years old when the discovery was made, and in May 2007, he was charged with Bonnie's murder. At the trial, he claimed that he and Bonnie had consensual intercourse and that she had actually fallen to her death after the two were done. Dion mentioned that he had not been around when Bonnie died, but the police had found a drop of Bonnie's blood on one of the trees above the creek, proving that she had been injured way before she fell down. And while the police had initially thought that the lacerations on Bonnie's head could have been injuries from her head hitting the rocks, Dion had actually been recorded previously where he talked about his experience in martial arts and how he always carried a sai, which was a prong-like weapon that matched the wound marks on Bonnie's head. So at this point, all the evidence was adding up. However, there was really no motive for the accused criminal to have killed Bonnie. The conclusion here was that the crime was absolutely random because neither Bonnie's family nor her friends ever knew of him. And as far as the claims of consensual intercourse go, Bonnie's family made it clear that she was in a committed relationship with her boyfriend. So any chance of cheating on him was out of the question, especially if the person was a complete stranger. As far as the police go, they did admit to having handled the case, especially Karen, a little unfairly. Right from the start, they should have never kept the family in the dark. But the reason why this was done was because the investigators didn't want any possible suspects to know what was going on behind the scenes, because they thought that if it was revealed that Bonnie's death was being investigated as a homicide, the killer would have tried to cover their tracks. With all these revelations coming to light, Dion was found guilty of Bonnie's assault and murder on June 15, 2011, and was sentenced to 124 years in prison.
Oh, is this a video? Okay. A wrap then.
This happened. I still wake up every day thinking it's a dream, but it's reality. And I'm dealing with it every day.
The mysterious disappearance of 15-year-old high school student Sierra LaMar is a case that shook the entire world. Known to be a happy-go-lucky cheerleader who was friends with almost everyone at Sobrato High, LaMar suddenly went missing when she was supposed to be walking to the school bus stop on the morning of March 16, 2012. So, how did it all go down? Sierra was born and raised in Fremont, California. However, after her parents decided to get a divorce, she moved to Morgan Hill with her mom, which is where she went to high school. From her teachers to her peers, everyone could easily say that Sierra had a bright future ahead of her. And she probably would have, if things hadn't happened the way that they did. On the fateful morning of March 16, 2012, Sierra woke up at 6 in the morning to get ready for her school day. Because she was pretty active on social media, she took a quick selfie and posted it online before leaving her mom's house at 7:15 a.m. This was routine for Sierra, who walked to her school's bus stop every day. The reason why she did this was that her house was too far away for the bus to come and pick her up, but Sierra never seemed to mind.
It was a typical morning. It was pretty much a routine. I would get ready for work, and before leaving, I would say goodbye to Sierra. And I would give her lunch money, and I would make sure that it was in her purse and zip it up.
Just like every other day, Sierra left, and her mom, Marlene, dropped her a couple of texts to remind her of all the chores she was supposed to do after getting home from school. Usually, Sierra would respond to these texts, but that day, she didn't. And while her mother noticed her daughter's unresponsiveness, she assumed that it was because she had gotten busy at school. However, when Marlene left for work at 3:45 p.m., she called her daughter again to check up on her, but Sierra never responded, so Marlene quickly drove home to see if she had fallen sick or something. But to her shock, her daughter had never made it back. The frantic mother then drove to Sierra's school to see if she had been caught up with something, but when she got there, The school authorities informed her that Sierra had never even come to school that day, which was very out of character for her. After exhausting all her options, Marlene called the police and filed a missing persons report. After the investigation kicked off, the police checked security footage on the school bus, and it turns out that Sierra was nowhere to be found on the bus that morning, which means that something happened to her while she was walking from her home to the bus stop. To find any suspects that could be linked from the case, the police thoroughly checked the footage of Sierra getting into the bus from the previous weeks, but nothing suspicious showed up, complicating the case even more. Now, mind you, at this point, this girl is nowhere to be found, so no one could say if she was still alive or not. Hoping for the best, the authorities sent out search parties to bring Sierra back home and offer Marlene some peace of mind. And while Sierra's body was still nowhere to be found, the police did manage to come across her phone lying around the area. However, they found no clue as to what could have happened to Sierra herself. Further investigations and probing led the police to an abandoned shed a few miles away from Sierra's home. This is where they found her bag poorly hidden between the shed and a few plants. The bag had Sierra's jeans, shoes, and the sweater she had worn that day that she had gone missing, all shoved inside. Thankfully, though, the backpack is also where the police found traces of DNA that they traced back to the then 21-year-old Antolin Garcia Torres, who became the primary suspect in the case. Once the police started keeping an eye on Torres, they discovered he lived about 7 miles from Sierra's bus stop at a trailer park and had already been charged with felony assault back in 2009. The police got a hold of the security footage from the trailer park and noticed that Torres left his home 15 minutes before Sierra would have left her house to catch the bus. And all of this was too perfect to be a coincidence. After the suspect was taken in for questioning, he maintained the claim that he had gone fishing when he had left the house that day. However, his alibi wasn't working since no one saw him at the nearest fishing spot. That, combined with the fact that the police had found his DNA on Sierra's bag, was enough reason for the authorities to let him know that he was going to be put on trial. To this, Antolin responded that he had a strange habit of pleasuring himself while he was driving around in his car. He claimed that one of the tissues that he had used during this process might have ended up on Sierra's bag, explaining the DNA. Now, we don't know about you, but that is too far-fetched of a story for us. Thankfully, the police seemed to think the same and continued to probe into the case. Eventually, they came across a witness who had spotted Antolin's car near the school bus stop around the time that Sierra disappeared. And when the police had enough evidence to issue a search warrant, they found locks from Sierra's hair all over Antolin's car, with her fingerprints marked on the door handles.
Reliving the whole nightmare, you know, my loss and how it affected everybody, the family, her friends. It was difficult to speak today.
That is the suspect in the Sierra LaMar disappearance case who was arrested earlier this evening.
All of this ending now more than 2 months of searching for the 15-year-old Morgan Hill girl. There are many, many unanswered questions tonight.
But what's surprising is that Torres maintained his innocence and even went as far as to plead not guilty. The alleged criminal went on to claim that he didn't even know Sierra, with his mom chiming in and claiming that her son could have never harmed a fly, let alone a poor girl. It took years for the trial to begin, and when Antolin was finally taken to court, it was revealed that in 2009, he had attempted to kidnap 3 separate women in an abandoned parking lot, giving the authorities all the more reason to believe that he was Sierra's culprit. On May 9, 2017, Antolin was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to life in jail. Sadly though, even after all these years, he has remained quiet about the whole situation, maintaining his claim of being innocent and not knowing who Sierra is. Antolin has refused to answer any questions that could help the police trace Sierra's body and bring peace to her grieving family. The convicted criminal also went on to write a public letter to news channels, claiming that the reporters aren't painting a clear picture of the situation and that he had nothing to do with Sierra. However, none of that matters anymore.
Hard for Marlene and Danielle and I. We just kind of just remember it, and we kind of would rather think about the happy times, hoping that one day we'll find her. Of course, to be able to get that closure would be would be good.
And while people are still officially on the hunt for any trace of her body, Sierra's family has gone on to say they have found peace knowing that Antolin is behind bars and no other girl will meet the same fate as Sierra at his hands. But we still hope that one day, Sierra's family can give her the send-off she deserves once her body is discovered.
This thing lives with us day and night, and it's hard to cope with. Sometimes I just can't hardly cope with it.
She loved going to school. That was what she wanted. She couldn't get enough school. She wanted to be somebody.
Brook Baker was 19 years old and majoring in journalism at the Vincennes University of Indiana. She was in her sophomore year and had big plans of becoming one of the biggest journalists in the country. But on September 7th, 1997, her entire life was taken from her. Brook lived in an off-campus residence close to her college. She was a popular girl who was loved by everyone. Her friends and family knew her as the happiest, kindest person in their lives. She was someone who lit up every room she entered. So it was a sad day when Brook's younger brother found her dead on the morning of September 7th, her body lying lifeless in her bedroom. Unable to handle what he had just seen, Brook's brother called the police, and an initial examination showed that she bore multiple stab wounds on her body, along with bruises that pointed at Brook struggling against someone who was trying to hold her down. A few days later, autopsy reports revealed that blood loss from 11 wounds was the reason for Brook's untimely and cruel death. But that wasn't all. The reports also confirmed that Brook was restrained and assaulted multiple times before she was jabbed. So, who was the culprit behind all of this? After scanning every inch of her house, police were able to come across a knife covered in soap water and identified as the murder weapon. What's strange, however, is that when the authorities were investigating the crime scene, they came across running water and Brook's bathtub being filled with things like towels and other items, which is also where the knife was found. So chances are that whoever killed Brook had done so to get rid of their fingerprints and any kind of DNA evidence that would point toward them. However, what they didn't realize was the fact that Brook's body could also be a carrier for the foreign DNA sample. At this point, the police already had a list of suspects. Not long before her death, Brook had reported an on-campus assault case, and the police believed that she had made herself some enemies because of the article. The incident had taken place in spring 1997 and had resulted in Brook interviewing a bunch of women who had bad experiences with the fraternity boys involved in the case. As a result, members of the fraternity threatened Brook with emails and in person to make her shut up. However, the aspiring journalist paid no heed to any of these interactions and continued with her investigation. Her mother, Janet, reported being concerned about her safety, but Brook, being the person that she was, wanted to make sure that no other girl on campus ever had to go through something like this. This had resulted in a truck full of fraternity brothers showing up at Brook's friend's house to threaten her into staying quiet. This is why she had decided to move to a new off-campus apartment. This is where the second suspect comes in. Brook's new landlord was a police officer who would come into her house unannounced, often catching her by surprise. One night, Brook was falling asleep and she spotted him shining a light inside through her window. In another instance, he barged into the house using his keys while Brook was in the shower. Brook had told her friends and family about how uncomfortable she was and that she was planning on finding a new place soon. So the police believed that the landlord could have walked in the same way on the night of her murder, where Brook must have confronted him, resulting in the landlord getting violent and killing her. A third theory stated that Brook was killed by someone who was posing to be a potential roommate for her. Brook had put out an ad in the campus newspaper for a roommate a few days before she was found dead, and the investigators believed that whoever had killed her had come across the ad and used that as a perfect opportunity to commit the crime. However, just like all the other theories, this one led up to nowhere. Even though it was pretty probable considering the fact that there were no signs of forced entry into the apartment and whoever killed Brook would have had to been let in with her consent. The DNA samples found at the crime scene were tested against 50 different suspects, but no one ended up being a match, and eventually the case went cold. Even Brook's family gave up any hope that they had of finding her killer. However, 2 years later, everything changed. Scratch that. Everything started to make sense. In July 1999, 21-year-old Erica Norman, who was another student at the university, was reported dead. The police went to her house to investigate and stumbled upon a shocking crime scene. And let's just say that her murder scene was 10 times worse than Brooke's, with her walls being covered with blood. However, there was an eerie similarity between the two crimes. The investigators once again found running water in the victim's bathtub. Similar to the night that Brooke had been murdered, Erica's bathtub was also full of towels and other things. And to top it all off, the murder weapon was a soapy knife that was found in the kitchen sink. This was all the proof that the authorities needed to believe that the two murders were connected. Sadly though, unlike Brooke, Erica's body was nowhere to be found. Further probing led the police to finding out that Norman had last been seen with a man named Brian Jones, who was a former student of the same university. What's more is that Jones also knew Baker. See how the dots are connecting here? When he was brought into questioning, the police found out that Jones was actually a roommate of the man who was dating Brooke before she was brutally murdered, which is how he knew her. When the police matched Jones's DNA sample with the sample found on Brooke's body, it was a perfect match. Soon after that, Norman's remains were discovered in a cornfield in Illinois, and lo and behold, Jones's DNA was a perfect match once again. The criminal was then charged with both murders and arrested. He ended up pleading guilty to Erica's murder to escape the death penalty.
Jones was found guilty on both counts of and murder. He had admitted to killing VU co-ed Erica Norman in 1999. Brook Baker's father is pleased with the verdict.
It's really totally been a waste of lives, everyone's lives, Brooke's, Erica's, ours. But we're satisfied. We know we have the right person, and maybe he won't be able to harm anyone anymore.
After the news was made public, witnesses came out to speak about how Jones had been spotted with scratches on his face the day after Brooke had died. Records also showed that a few days prior to the crime, he had rented a movie where a girl is stabbed to death, with the criminal washing the knife in a sink to evade authorities. How creepy is that?
Why shouldn't I have hard feelings? I lost somebody that I love very much. And people shouldn't have the right to go around here and just take a life anytime they want it.
Thankfully, Jones was sentenced to life in prison in 2007 without any possibility of parole to make sure that he never gets to take another life ever again.